Hi guys, Simon here, welcome to the channel. Broken part 7. Where did we leave it off? Martin and Bar had arrived on Koh Samet in the morning after spending a night on the mainland, and had found a nice hotel with the bamboo type hotel rooms, huts, rooms right on the beach, and 600-700 baht a night, fan room, no aircon, basic but absolutely fine. Let's go back a little bit and talk about Bar. I've already mentioned Bar in Thailand, or Ba, means crazy, and she certainly was and is. At the time of this story, I estimate she was somewhere between 19 and 23 years old. She was about 5'5", very slim, attractive, and had been working in Pattaya for a good 4 years, maybe longer. So she, at a very young age, went to Pattaya. She came from, if my memory serves me right, an area in Buriram, in a small village, and I believe she had a sister, and mother still alive. I think the father still alive, but working in Pattaya for all these years, she used to go home on the odd occasion, give money to the family, or probably send money. She was earning good money. Back in those days, a bar girl in a beer bar up on the top of Second Road would command, for a longer period of aerobics, 1,000 baht, maybe 1,500, and for a shorter period of time, 500 to 1,000 baht, and bar fines were 300 baht for those type of bars. But the money added up, especially if you had a lot of customers. Now, like a lot of bar girls back then, and this is sort of 99, 2000 years, things have changed a lot over the last 20 years in Pattaya. Back then, in that era, there was a lot of scare and talk about HIV and AIDS, and the bars, let's just say the girls used to go to a clinic, get a ticket, with very little checks done, and the bars, I believe, had to keep that record of those. We did, we had the record of all the girls' chitties and ID cards and stuff. But back then again, ID cards were obtainable quite easily with wrong dates on, if you know what I mean. Also, back then, 20 years ago, drugs are illegal in Thailand, then, now, and in the future. And there are heavy penalties for getting involved in those at all. But I refer to them through all these stories as unusual substances, let's just call it that. Many bar girls, and I don't know if this is the same today, but we're talking about that era. Many of them, if they worked in a go-go bar, would have a boyfriend, a Thai boyfriend, maybe a bouncer on the door, a doorman, or a taxi driver, motorcycle taxi driver, or some of the boys that were security in some ways or other, or even a DJ. But a lot of DJs were actually tomboys in that era. So the girls sometimes had the tomboy, so a girlfriend. And sometimes they had other girls in the bar as their girlfriends. So Bar, back then, after 4 or 5 years in Pattaya, had got the taste of alcohol. She was, like many of the bar girls, alcoholic, you could say, for the amount of hours they were drinking. I know after 2 years managing a bar in Pattaya, I was becoming an alcoholic. So the girls, a lot of them were alcoholics. And then through the shifts, or after the shifts, if they worked in beer bars, their boyfriends, if they had them, would be more than likely motorcycle taxi riders that are hanging around outside the bars on the road, or girlfriends, or as I say, maybe DJs and things. But they, with quiet periods with no customers about, the bars, to gee up the girls, would put a bucket of ice, put some whiskey in there and soda water and things, and all the girls would drink out of it. They'd all have their own straw and they'd drink out of that, just to keep them in the right mood for customers who wanted a party. But also in between times or after shifts, the girls were addicted to those illegal substances. Where they got them, boyfriends, motorcycle taxi riders, I don't know, but they would go off and do this sort of thing. And another thing which mostly is illegal in Thailand is gambling, and quite often 20 years ago there was lots of card games going on illegally and a lot of gambling. So when you take one of those bar girls, if she hadn't had a customer and she was a little bit depressed, and she'd take those substances, go a bit of gambling, the girls mounted, actually got themselves into quite a bit of debt. Sometimes the bar owners would lend them money, but quite often it would be boys on bikes and various organisations lending them money. So that caused some problems amongst them, and then it pushed them harder to get customers, to get money. Some girls turned into really quite evil girls. Bar wasn't one of those evil girls. She was just as if she had a huge amount of energy, and with whatever substance and drink and concoctions or cocktails, she would be full of beans all the time. But she was absolutely crazy. She was just on a score of 0 to 10 of being so full on. She was a 10. And mood swings would be a common thing with her. She spent a long time in Pattaya. The lifespan of a girl working there could be from 18, 17 years old till they're 30, so it's quite a long time. They were on Sumet. It was morning, so they just went out and ate. Martin liked Thai food. He was getting the taste for it. He could eat any of it, any spice, pretty quickly. He was, as I say, quite slim and fit, and he was full of beans, full of life. They spent 3 or 4 days on Sumet in the daytime on the beach, drinking, eating, and at night they would party around the bars that were there. And Martin, as I said, wasn't a cheap Charlie. He would quite happily spend a lot of money on alcohol, but he kept off. He was keeping off spirits and things, doctor's orders, and he was staying on beer. And he'd get drunk, and Bar would get drunk as well, and then back for aerobics. They were both of them pretty athletic, so fun was had by both. And after a few days they were thought time to move on, so they left the island and went further down the mainland and got a ferry across to Koh Chang. Probably the better of the two islands, prettier beaches, more life there, more things to do. And again they found a reasonable hotel with rooms that were close. It was a normal hotel, so it was close to the beach. You walk out the rooms and down past the pool, and it was a little bit more money. I think back then you would have paid about 700-800 baht. And fell in love with Koh Chang, he did. And later on in this love story, Koh Chang plays a bigger part in his life. He was here for a month. He'd already had a week in Pattaya before Bar had come back, and they're coming towards the end of the second week. But they explored. They rented a scooter. They travelled all around Koh Chang over a period of about 10 days, and had an absolutely great time. She wasn't misbehaving, she was getting drunk, but she wasn't getting leery or Larry or shouting and getting abusive. All she was doing was drinking. And Martin was falling for her. Absolutely head over heels. And even though he knew that she had a temper and I'd warned him, he was falling for her. Ko Chang finished, so he's 2.5 weeks into his holiday, and they head back to Pattaya. Get back and late afternoon, and she said that she's going to go back to her room, get her clothes washed, get some other clothes. He checked into that hotel again he had in Scow Beach, and they agreed to meet, and he's already paid the bar fine for her. They agreed to meet just along Second Road between her bar and Scow Beach somewhere for food in a few hours later on. And in that gap he came down to my bar and caught up with me, told me everything that's gone on, and I was very surprised that she hadn't gone crazy on him on that trip, and she'd been well behaved. I was very surprised, but I wasn't surprised to hear him say that he's fallen for her. I mean, that was just the way it was. I could see it happening. He'd already made indications of that. Bless. But I still again gave him a bit of a warning, and he didn't listen. Of course not. No one ever listens to advice. Bit later, he said, I'm off, I'm going to go see her and we're going to have a wander around, and off they went. Next morning, they'd had the evening together. He came down to my bar quite early, and again it was about 10 o'clock. I wasn't up till 10, 11 o'clock most mornings, but lucky I was up that morning. And he came down, we had a coffee in my bar, and he was saying how great night he'd had, and that he wasn't going to pay her bar. He was just going to spend the next week and a half going to a bar, but it's going to cost him more in the end for drinks and stuff. He'd have been better off because he'd be buying her mates drinks in the bar, but he wouldn't listen. I gave him some more advice. We went off for breakfast. Quite often we go to Greg's Kitchen up on Second Road, but a few doors up was a cafe called, I think it was Only Fools and Horses, and we went there and had breakfast. And that was good. And then he said that he was just going to wander around in the daytimes, go to the beach, get massages, maybe pop to Soy 6, and then spend the evenings with her through the night in her bar. Fair enough. Off he went. And I didn't hear from him for about 3 days. Nothing at all. And then he's got, what, 6 days left. He turns up at about 2 in the afternoon. Says to me that he'd had a bit of a bust up with Bar. She'd got drunk in the bar at night and before, and that she'd walked out, disappeared for a couple of hours, and then come back even more drunk, if it was drunk, or in a crazy mood, and they'd had a bust up. And he just like, she's absolutely potty. He said, but he really, really likes her. She hadn't got violent, just stood up and shouting at him in front of everyone in the bar, and just screaming at him at the top of her voice for doing nothing, apparently. Bless. And I said to him, look, you know, she's volatile. She's just like a volcano, ready to go off at any point. And we chatted about it, but it didn't make any difference. He said he was going back to make up with her that evening. Okay, and off he went. It went quiet again. I didn't hear from him for another 4 days maybe, and eventually caught up with him, and everything was great. They sorted everything out and all happy, and they'd been having lots of aerobics, all good. And it was time for him to go home. He was contemplating changing his ticket and staying longer, but he had to get back. This time he'd sat down with Bar and emails and worked it all out, how they would communicate, and they would communicate, he said. So all good, even though she was staying working in the bar, he was happy with that and fine with that. Knowing that she was going to go with other customers didn't seem to faze him. And that was it, holiday end. We said our goodbyes. Off he went, flew home. No cliffhanger, nothing to keep you hanging this time. He really had fallen for her, and I'm to this day I still can't fathom what the attraction was. Okay, she was a pretty girl, but she was trouble. She really was trouble. About he was back. He was going to work for 6 months back in the UK, and about 3 months later, he rang me up from the UK, and I was totally gobsmacked and shocked that he'd rung up, and nice to hear from you and all the niceties. And he said, I've got a problem. And I said, okay, what sort of problem? And he said, Bar. And I said, I remember saying, I said, oh, what's she done now? And he said, she'd been arrested and not locked up, but she'd had to pay a fine, something like 20,000 baht, which is a lot, and she needed him to send her a bit of money, and he was happy to, he said. He said, but that's not it. So I walked him through a way of getting money to me, and then I said that I would go and or he could send her to the bar and collect it, and that's what ended up happening. He said, but that's not it. I said, oh, so she's been caught for some sort of substances, possession, not selling, just possession, and there's more than that. And yes, he said, so maybe there is a cliffhanger coming. He said she's pregnant. Catch you on the next one, guys. Bye for now.